Marcus Williams stood in the crisp morning air outside the Royal Guard training facility, adjusting his uniform one last time. The imposing stone building loomed before him, its windows reflecting the early sunlight like watchful eyes. At 32, he was older than most recruits, and he could feel the curious stares of the younger men around him. Their perfectly pressed uniforms and eager expressions reminded him of his own youth, though that felt like a lifetime ago. The other recruits whispered among themselves, shooting glances in his direction. Marcus caught fragments of their conversations. Questions about why someone his age would be starting fresh in the Royal Guard, speculation about his background, and barely concealed amusement at his quiet demeanor. He had expected this. After spending 8 years in the Special Air Service, he was used to being underestimated. It had served him well in covert operations, and he suspected it might serve him here too. "Look at that old-timer," one recruit murmured to his friend, loud enough for Marcus to hear. "Probably couldn't make it in the real military and thinks this will be easier." The comment drew snickers from several others nearby. Marcus simply smiled to himself and continued adjusting his gear. He had heard far worse in the mountains of Afghanistan and the deserts of Iraq. The training facility's main doors swung open with a heavy thud, and Sergeant Major Richardson emerged. His presence immediately silenced the chattering recruits. Richardson was a legend in the Royal Guard, a man who had served for over 20 years and had trained thousands of guards. His steely gray eyes swept across the assembled group like a hawk surveying prey. "Welcome to hell, gentlemen," Richardson announced, his voice carrying across the courtyard without any need for amplification. "For the next 12 weeks, you belong to me. Some of you think you know what you're in for. Some of you think your daddy's money or your university education will help you here. You're wrong." Marcus listened intently, studying Richardson's posture and tone. The man was clearly competent, but Marcus had served under officers in situations where failure meant death, not just embarrassment. Still, he respected the process and the institution he was now part of. "The Royal Guard is not just about standing still and looking pretty," Richardson continued, beginning to pace in front of the formation. "You are the last line of defense for the Crown. You are protectors, soldiers, and guardians of tradition. Most of you will not make it through training. Those who do will earn the right to serve." The sergeant major stopped directly in front of Marcus, looking him up and down with obvious skepticism. "Mr. Williams, isn't it? Age 32. Bit old to be starting a new career, don't you think?" "No, Sergeant Major," Marcus replied calmly, maintaining eye contact. "I believe experience has value." Richardson's eyebrows raised slightly at the confident response. Around them, the other recruits shifted uncomfortably, expecting their new colleague to be torn apart for his boldness. Instead, Richardson simply nodded and moved on. "Your first test begins now," Richardson announced to the group. "A 5-mile run in full gear. Anyone who falls behind or quits doesn't belong here. Fall in behind me." As they began running through the streets surrounding the palace grounds, Marcus quickly found himself surrounded by younger, fitter-looking recruits who clearly expected to leave him behind. James Mitchell, a 22-year-old former university rugby player, made a point of running alongside Marcus. "Don't worry, old man," James said with a patronizing smile. "I'll make sure you don't get lost back there." Marcus simply nodded politely and maintained his steady pace. The younger man gradually increased his speed, clearly trying to show off. Several other recruits followed suit, turning the training run into an impromptu race. Marcus watched them pull ahead, noting their inefficient breathing patterns and the way they were already beginning to strain after just 2 miles. By the 3rd mile, the pack had spread out considerably. The early leaders were beginning to fade, their initial burst of energy depleting rapidly. Marcus maintained his methodical pace, the rhythm second nature after years of endurance training in hostile environments. He had learned long ago that consistency beats intensity in the long run. James, who had been leading the pack, began to slow noticeably. His face was flushed red and his breathing had become labored. One by one, the other show-offs began to fall back as well. Marcus continued at his steady pace, now finding himself moving through the ranks without any increase in effort. How was he doing that? One recruit gasped to another as Marcus passed them. By the 4th mile, Marcus had moved into the top third of the group. Richardson, who had been running at the front while monitoring his recruits, noticed the quiet older man's progress with interest. The sergeant major had seen this before. The difference between flash and substance, between ego and discipline. The final mile was where true character revealed itself. Several recruits had already dropped out completely, bent over on the roadside trying to catch their breath. Others were walking, having pushed too hard too early. Marcus continued his relentless machine-like pace, his breathing still controlled and his form still perfect. As they approached the training facility, Marcus found himself in 5th place overall, having passed dozens of younger, apparently fitter recruits. He wasn't even breathing heavily as he crossed the finish line. Behind him, James Mitchell stumbled across nearly 3 minutes later, looking like he might be sick. Richardson checked his stopwatch and made notes on his clipboard. When Marcus approached for his time, the sergeant major looked at him with new interest. "Interesting technique, Williams," Richardson said. "Most recruits try to impress on day one. You ran like someone who's done this before. Just focused on finishing." "Sergeant Major," Marcus replied simply, as the stragglers continued to arrive, some requiring medical attention. The other recruits began to look at Marcus differently. The quiet older man who they had dismissed that morning had just outperformed most of them without breaking a sweat. The jokes and whispers stopped, replaced by curious glances and grudging respect. But this was only the beginning. Marcus knew that the real challenges lay ahead, and his fellow recruits had no idea what kind of training and experience he brought to this new chapter of his life. The weapons training facility smelled of gun oil and metal polish. Marcus followed the other recruits into the long, narrow building that housed the Royal Guard's marksmanship program. Rows of shooting stations stretched out before them, each equipped with the latest targeting equipment and safety measures. This was where legends were made, or careers ended before they truly began. Instructor Captain Davies stood at the front of the room, a silver-haired man with the bearing of someone who had seen action. His uniform was immaculate, and a collection of shooting badges adorned his chest. Behind him, a display case showed various weapons used by the Royal Guard throughout history. "Gentlemen, marksmanship is not optional in the Royal Guard," Captain Davies began, his Welsh accent adding gravity to his words. "You will learn to shoot accurately under pressure in all weather conditions and in situations where failure is not an option. Today we start with basics." The recruits were issued standard-issue rifles and given a brief safety lecture. Marcus handled his weapon with the casual familiarity of someone who had used similar equipment thousands of times, though he was careful not to appear too comfortable. The other recruits fumbled with their weapons, clearly nervous about handling live ammunition. James Mitchell, who had recovered from his poor showing on the run, was eager to redeem himself. "I was in the university shooting club," he announced loudly to anyone who would listen. "Won several competitions, actually." "Outstanding, Mitchell," Captain Davies replied dryly. "Let's see if university targets shoot back." The first exercise was simple, 10 shots at a standard target from 50 meters. The recruits would fire in pairs, with the rest observing and learning from each attempt. Marcus was paired with James, who insisted on going first to show the old-timer how it's done. James took his position with obvious confidence, adjusting his stance and checking his sight alignment multiple times. He was clearly familiar with competitive shooting techniques. When he fired his 10 rounds, his grouping was respectable. 7 hits within the scoring rings with 3 shots just outside. "Not bad, Mitchell," Captain Davies acknowledged. 70 points out of a possible 100. "That's passing." James beamed with pride and stepped back, expecting praise from his fellow recruits. Several congratulated him, impressed by what seemed like an excellent score for a first attempt. "Your turn, Williams," Captain Davies called out. Marcus approached the firing line with no fanfare. He took his position, made minimal adjustments, and controlled his breathing. The other recruits watched with mild interest, expecting a decent but unremarkable performance from the older man. Marcus fired his first shot. The electronic scoring system immediately displayed a perfect bullseye. He fired again. Another bullseye. By his third shot, the room had gone completely quiet except for the sound of the rifle reports. 10 shots later, Marcus lowered his weapon. The scoring display showed a perfect 100, 10 consecutive bullseyes in a tight grouping that could be covered by a coin. The silence in the room was deafening. Captain Davies walked over to examine the target personally, though the electronic scoring system left no room for doubt. 10 shots, 10 bullseyes, he announced to the room. "Perfect score." The other recruits stared in disbelief. James Mitchell's face had gone pale. Competitive shooting was one thing, But this level of precision was something else entirely. "Lucky shots," someone whispered from the back of the group. Captain Davies heard the comment and smiled grimly. "Lucky shots, you say? Williams, would you mind demonstrating again? This time let's make it interesting. 100 meters wind conditions and you have 30 seconds to fire 5 shots. Marcus nodded and moved to the longer range station. The increased distance and time pressure would challenge even experienced marksmen. Wind flags along the range indicated a slight crosswind that would affect bullet trajectory. The other recruits gathered around, some hoping to see Marcus fail and prove that his previous performance was indeed luck. The electronic timer was set, and Marcus took his position. "Begin," Captain Davies commanded. Marcus fired his first shot within 3 seconds. Bullseye. The second shot followed immediately. Bullseye. His rhythm was mechanical, precise with no wasted motion or hesitation. The third, fourth, and fifth shots followed in rapid succession, each finding the center of the target. When the timer stopped, Marcus had fired all 5 shots with 8 seconds to spare. All 5 were bullseyes grouped so tightly, they formed a single ragged hole in the center of the target. The room erupted in whispers and murmurs. This was beyond exceptional. This was the kind of shooting that typically took years to develop if it could be developed at all. Captain Davies approached Marcus with obvious curiosity. "Mr. Williams, that was extraordinary shooting. Where exactly did you learn to shoot like that?" Marcus hesitated for a moment. His SAS background was not something he had planned to reveal, at least not yet. "I've had some experience with firearms, sir." "Some experience?" Captain Davies raised an eyebrow. "Son, I've been training marksmen for 15 years. That wasn't some experience. That was world-class precision shooting." The other recruits pressed closer, eager to hear Marcus's explanation. James Mitchell looked particularly disturbed, his earlier confidence completely shattered. "I served in the military before joining the Royal Guard," Marcus said simply, offering no additional details. "Which unit?" Captain Davies pressed. Marcus looked around at the eager faces surrounding him. He could see the mix of curiosity, respect, and suspicion in their eyes. He had hoped to blend in, to complete his training without drawing attention to his background. But his skills were too refined to hide completely. "Special Forces," he said finally. "But that's in the past now." Captain Davies nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. Special Forces training would explain the exceptional marksmanship, but it raised other questions. Why would someone with that background be starting over in the Royal Guard? "Well, gentlemen," Captain Davies addressed the group, "you've just witnessed what years of professional training can produce. Mr. Williams has set the bar rather high for the rest of you." As the session continued, Marcus found himself the center of attention in a way he had hoped to avoid. The other recruits' attitudes toward him had shifted dramatically. Some looked at him with newfound respect, others with suspicion, and a few with barely concealed resentment. James Mitchell was particularly affected. His identity as the group's natural leader had been built on his athletic ability and competitive shooting background. Now he found himself completely outclassed by someone he had dismissed as a washed-up older recruit. During the break, several recruits approached Marcus with questions about his background, but he deflected them politely. He was here to start fresh, not to relive his military career. But he was beginning to realize that keeping his past completely hidden might be impossible. As they prepared for the next exercise, Marcus noticed Sergeant Major Richardson observing from the back of the room. The man's expression was unreadable, but Marcus could tell he was taking notes. Word was clearly spreading about the quiet older recruit who could shoot like a professional sniper. The afternoon would bring more challenges, and Marcus suspected that his secret was becoming harder to keep with each passing hour. The hand-to-hand combat training hall echoed with the sounds of grunting, heavy breathing, and bodies hitting mats. Instructor Sergeant Walsh, a compact man built like a concrete block, demonstrated basic defensive techniques to the assembled recruits. His movements were precise and economical, each technique designed for maximum effectiveness with minimum effort. "The Royal Guard must be prepared for any situation," Walsh explained, as he demonstrated a simple arm lock. "Diplomats, protesters, and yes, even potential threats to the crown. You need to be able to neutralize a threat without creating an international incident." Marcus watched from the back of the group, noting the instructor's solid fundamentals. Walsh clearly knew what he was doing. though his techniques were focused on restraint and control, rather than the more aggressive methods Marcus had learned in his special forces training. The recruits were divided into pairs for practice. James Mitchell, still smarting from his poor showing on the rifle range, made sure to pair himself with Marcus. Several other recruits gathered around to watch, sensing that another confrontation was brewing. "Let's see if you're as tough as you are accurate," James said quietly, just loud enough for the others to hear. Marcus simply nodded and took his position. At 6 feet 2 inches and 190 pounds, James had a significant size advantage over Marcus's more compact 5'10" frame. The younger man had also mentioned his rugby background, which suggested he was comfortable with physical contact. "Begin with the basic wrist escape," Sergeant Walsh called out. "The larger partner will grab the smaller partner's wrist, and the smaller partner will execute the escape technique I just demonstrated." James grabbed Marcus's wrist with unnecessary force, clearly trying to intimidate. "Come on then, old man. Let's see you get out of this." Marcus executed the basic escape technique exactly as Sergeant Walsh had demonstrated, a simple twist and pull that leveraged proper mechanics over brute strength. James's grip was broken effortlessly, leaving him slightly off balance. "Lucky break," James muttered. "My turn to escape." When Marcus grabbed James's wrist, he applied just enough pressure to simulate the exercise without causing discomfort. James attempted the same technique but executed it poorly, relying on strength rather than proper form. Marcus allowed the escape to succeed anyway, not wanting to escalate the situation. "Switch partners," Sergeant Walsh commanded. Everyone should practice with different body types and strength levels. As the recruits rotated, Marcus found himself paired with David Chen, a quiet, technical recruit who had performed well in academic subjects. David was clearly nervous about the physical training but was determined to give his best effort. "I'm not very good at this stuff," David admitted quietly. "Just focus on the technique," Marcus replied. "Strength matters less than you think." As they practiced, Marcus provided gentle guidance, helping David understand the mechanics of each movement. His coaching was patient and effective, and David began to improve noticeably. Other recruits started to take notice of Marcus's teaching ability. "How do you know so much about this?" David asked during a break. "You pick things up over time," Marcus replied vaguely. Sergeant Walsh had been observing the pairs and noticed Marcus's effective coaching. When it came time for demonstrations, he called Marcus forward. "Williams, you seem to have a good grasp of these techniques. Would you mind demonstrating the defensive counter to a tackle attempt?" Marcus hesitated. The technique Walsh wanted to demonstrate was basic, but executing it properly would reveal more about his training than he wanted to show. However, refusing would draw even more attention. "Of course, Sergeant," Marcus replied. Walsh positioned himself for a rugby-style tackle, the kind that might be attempted by someone trying to rush a royal family member. "The key is to redirect the attacker's momentum rather than trying to stop it entirely," he explained to the class. As Walsh charged forward, Marcus smoothly sidestepped and used a hip throw that sent the instructor tumbling across the mat in a controlled fall. What should have been a basic defensive demonstration looked more like a martial arts masterclass. Walsh rolled to his feet with a surprised expression. "That was very well executed, Williams." The watching recruits burst into excited chatter. Marcus had just thrown their combat instructor like he was a practice dummy, and he had made it look effortless. "Could you show us that again?" one recruit called out. "I think once is enough," Marcus replied, hoping to deflect attention. But Sergeant Walsh was intrigued. "Actually, Williams, would you mind demonstrating the technique against a more aggressive attack? Mitchell, would you please attempt to tackle Mr. Williams with full force?" James's eyes lit up at the opportunity. Here was his chance to get back at the older man who had embarrassed him earlier. "Happy to help, Sergeant." Marcus realized he was trapped. Refusing would look cowardly, but accepting meant revealing more of his capabilities. He decided to end this quickly and cleanly. James took position 20 feet away, clearly planning to use his size and rugby experience to overwhelm Marcus. When Walsh gave the signal, James charged forward with genuine aggression, intending to drive Marcus to the ground hard. What happened next was almost too fast for the watching recruits to follow. As James approached, Marcus seemed to barely move. There was a subtle shift in his stance, a precise timing of his hands, and suddenly James was flying through the air before landing hard on his back. Completely winded, the silence in the training hall was absolute. James lay on the mat, gasping for breath and staring at the ceiling in complete bewilderment. He had no idea what had just happened to him. Sergeant Walsh stared at Marcus with new respect and growing suspicion. "That was not a technique I taught in this class." "No, Sergeant," Marcus admitted. "It's something I learned elsewhere." "Elsewhere being special forces, I presume?" The question hung in the air. Marcus looked around at the faces of his fellow recruits, some awed, some suspicious, all curious. His cover was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. "Something like that," Marcus said finally. Sergeant Walsh nodded slowly. "Class dismissed. Williams, please remain behind." As the other recruits filed out, many stopping to help James to his feet, Marcus prepared for questions he wasn't sure he wanted to answer. Through the windows he could see Sergeant Major Richardson approaching the building. Word was definitely spreading about the mysterious older recruit. Walsh waited until they were alone before speaking. "Son, I've been teaching hand-to-hand combat for 8 years. What you just did was not standard military training. That was something much more specialized." Marcus remained silent, weighing his options. "Look," Walsh continued, "I don't know what your story is, and I don't need to know all the details. But these recruits are starting to ask questions, and some of them are getting ideas about challenging you to prove themselves. That could get someone seriously hurt." "I understand, Sergeant," Marcus replied. "I'll be more careful." "It's not about being careful," Walsh said. "It's about being honest. These young men deserve to know what they're training alongside, and the command staff needs to understand what kind of asset they have in their program." As if on cue, Sergeant Major Richardson entered the training hall. His expression was neutral, but Marcus could see the calculating look in his eyes. "Mr. Williams," Richardson said, "I think it's time we had a conversation." Sergeant Major Richardson's office was a study in military precision. Commendation certificates lined the walls alongside photographs of Richardson with various members of the royal family. Behind his desk sat a glass case containing medals and honors accumulated over 2 decades of service. Marcus sat in the hard wooden chair across from Richardson's desk, maintaining perfect posture despite the uncomfortable circumstances. Richardson studied Marcus's file, though he suspected it contained only the basic information that any civilian applicant would provide. The previous day's events in both marksmanship and hand-to-hand combat had raised too many questions to ignore. Marcus Williams, age 32, previously employed as a security consultant, Richardson read aloud. "Clean background check, excellent physical condition, and according to my instructors, skills that far exceed anything a security consultant should possess." Marcus remained silent, knowing that anything he said could complicate his situation further. "Captain Davies tells me you shot a perfect score under pressure conditions. Sergeant Walsh says you neutralized a full-force attack from a man 50 pounds heavier than you without breaking a sweat." Richardson closed the file and leaned back in his chair. "These are not normal skills, Mr. Williams." "I've had good training, Sergeant Major," Marcus replied carefully. "Good training," Richardson repeated with a slight smile. "Son, I've trained over 3,000 Royal Guards in my career. I've seen good training. What you displayed was exceptional training, the kind that costs millions of pounds and takes years to develop." The two men stared at each other across the desk. Marcus had faced interrogation before, in situations far more dangerous than this, but he found himself in an unusual position. He genuinely wanted to complete this training and begin his new career, but his old skills kept revealing themselves. "Let me ask you directly," Richardson continued. "What unit did you serve with?" Marcus had reached a decision point. Continuing to hide his background was becoming impossible, and lying to a superior officer felt wrong after years of military discipline. 22nd Special Air Service Regiment, Marcus said quietly. Richardson's eyebrows raised slightly. The SAS was the most elite special forces unit in the British military, legendary for their selection process and operational capabilities. That explained everything. The marksmanship, the combat skills, the calm demeanor under pressure. "How long?" Richardson asked. 8 years. "Reached the rank of Staff Sergeant. And you left to become a Royal Guard?" Richardson's tone carried genuine curiosity rather than judgment. Marcus considered his answer carefully. The real reasons for his career change were personal and painful, involving operations that had cost him friends and left him questioning his place in that world. "I wanted something different." Marcus said finally. A way to serve that didn't involve what I was doing before. Richardson nodded slowly. He had seen combat veterans before, and he recognized the careful way Marcus chose his words. There were stories there, operations that would never be discussed publicly. The problem, Mr. Williams, is that your presence is disrupting my training program, Richardson said. Word has spread about your capabilities. Some recruits are intimidated. Others are looking for opportunities to challenge you, and my instructors are questioning their own methods. Marcus felt a sinking sensation. Had his attempt at a fresh start already failed? However, Richardson continued, I also recognize that you represent an exceptional asset. Your skills, combined with proper training in Royal Guard protocols, could make you one of the finest guards in the service. What are you proposing, Sergeant Major? Honesty, Richardson said simply. I want you to brief your fellow recruits on your background. Not the classified details, obviously, but enough so they understand who they're training with. Some will respect it, others might resent it, but at least it will end the speculation and rumors. Marcus considered the proposal. Revealing his SAS background would certainly change how the other recruits viewed him, and not necessarily for the better. Military Special Forces had a complicated reputation, respected but also somewhat feared. What about the instructors? Marcus asked. I'll handle the instructors, Richardson replied. In fact, I think you might be able to help improve our training program. Your experience in real-world situations could provide valuable insights. Before Marcus could respond, there was a knock on the office door. Enter, Richardson called. The door opened to reveal James Mitchell, still moving somewhat stiffly from his encounter in the combat training hall. His face showed a mixture of determination and nervousness. Sergeant Major, I request permission to speak with you about Recruit Williams. Richardson glanced at Marcus, then back at James. What's on your mind, Mitchell? Sir, I believe Recruit Williams may be misrepresenting his background and capabilities. His performance in training suggests he may have undisclosed military experience that could affect the integrity of the selection process. Marcus had to admire the young man's courage, even if his timing was unfortunate. James was clearly struggling with being outperformed and was looking for a way to level the playing field. Interesting theory, Mitchell, Richardson said dryly. Mr. Williams and I were just discussing that very topic. James's confidence faltered slightly. Sir? As it happens, you're quite correct about Mr. Williams' background. He did serve in the military before applying to the Royal Guard. He was a staff sergeant in the SAS. The color drained from James's face as the implications hit him. He had been challenging and trying to intimidate a former SAS operative. His embarrassment was visible and acute. I apologize, sir. I didn't know. Of course you didn't know, Richardson said, not unkindly. That's precisely the problem we're trying to solve. Mr. Williams has been attempting to blend in rather than standing out, but his skills make that impossible. Marcus looked at James with something approaching sympathy. The young man was clearly dedicated and had leadership potential, but he was struggling with having his assumptions challenged. Mitchell, Marcus said quietly, you're a good soldier. Don't let ego get in the way of learning. James stared at him for a moment, then straightened to attention. Yes, sir. Understood. Richardson watched the exchange with interest. Very well, gentlemen. Mitchell, you'll get your answers tomorrow when Mr. Williams addresses the entire recruit class. Williams, I expect you to be honest about your background while remaining appropriately discreet about classified matters. As they prepared to leave, Richardson added one final comment. Gentlemen, the Royal Guard serves the Crown, not individual egos. I expect both of you to remember that as we move forward. Walking back to the barracks together, James and Marcus found themselves in an awkward silence. Finally, James spoke up. I feel like a complete idiot. Don't, Marcus replied. You showed initiative and courage. Those are good qualities in a guard, but I was completely wrong about you. Marcus stopped walking and turned to face the younger man. James, you weren't wrong to question things that didn't make sense. You were wrong to let personal pride cloud your judgment. There's a difference. As they reached the barracks, other recruits were waiting with obvious curiosity about James's meeting with the Sergeant Major. Marcus realized that tomorrow's revelation would change everything about his remaining time in training. The quiet older recruit who just wanted to start fresh was about to become the former SAS operative who was training to guard the Crown. Whether that would help or hinder, his new career remained to be seen. The assembly hall buzzed with nervous energy as all 43 recruits gathered for what Sergeant Major Richardson had called a special briefing. Rumors had been flying since the previous day's training incidents, and everyone knew that Marcus Williams was somehow at the center of whatever was about to be revealed. Marcus sat in the front row, his expression calm despite the churning in his stomach. Revealing his background felt like exposing himself in a way he hadn't done since leaving the SAS. These young men had formed opinions about him over the past weeks, and those opinions were about to be dramatically altered. James Mitchell sat 2 seats away, still processing the revelation from the previous day. Around the room, other recruits whispered theories and speculation. David Chen, who had benefited from Marcus's coaching and combat training, looked concerned about his informal mentor. Sergeant Major Richardson entered the hall with his characteristic purposeful stride, immediately commanding attention without saying a word. Behind him followed Captain Davies and Sergeant Walsh, their serious expressions indicating this was no routine briefing. "Gentlemen," Richardson began, "over the past weeks, you've all been training together, forming bonds, and establishing the teamwork essential to Royal Guard service. Today, I need to share information that will change your understanding of one of your fellow recruits." The room fell completely silent. Marcus could feel dozens of pairs of eyes turning toward him. Recruit Williams has displayed exceptional skills in marksmanship and hand-to-hand combat that have raised questions about his background. Rather than allow rumors and speculation to continue, he has agreed to share his military service history with all of you. Richardson stepped aside, gesturing for Marcus to stand. As Marcus rose and moved to the front of the room, he could see a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and anticipation on the faces before him. "My name is Marcus Williams," he began, his voice steady and clear. "Before joining the Royal Guard training program, I served 8 years in the British Army, specifically with the 22nd Special Air Service Regiment." The reaction was immediate and varied. Some recruits sat back in shock, others leaned forward with new interest, and a few looked skeptical, as if this might be some kind of elaborate joke. "I joined the SAS at age 24, after serving 3 years in the Parachute Regiment," Marcus continued. "During my time with the regiment, I completed multiple deployments in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other locations I cannot discuss. I achieved the rank of Staff Sergeant before leaving the service 6 months ago." A hand shot up from the middle of the room. Richardson nodded for the recruit to speak. "Why did you leave?" asked Thomas Burke, a former police officer who had been one of the steadier performers in training. Marcus had expected this question but still found it difficult to answer. "Personal reasons," he said simply. "I felt it was time for a different kind of service." Another recruit, Michael Foster, raised his hand. "Why didn't you tell us from the beginning?" "Because I wanted to start fresh," Marcus replied honestly. "I didn't want my past to define my future or to affect how any of you viewed me as a teammate." James Mitchell stood up, drawing attention from around the room. "I owe everyone an apology," he said, his voice carrying clearly. "I challenged Marcus multiple times, thinking he was just some older guy trying to prove himself. I was completely wrong and I behaved badly." Marcus nodded respectfully toward James. "You had no way of knowing, and you showed courage in questioning what you didn't understand." The questions continued for 20 minutes. Some recruits wanted to know about SAS training methods. Others asked about combat experience, and a few seemed concerned about whether Marcus's presence gave him an unfair advantage in their program. Captain Davies stepped forward to address the last concern. "Recruit Williams's background does give him certain advantages in specific skills," he acknowledged. "However, Royal Guard service requires much more than marksmanship and combat abilities. Protocol, ceremony, public interaction, and institutional knowledge are all areas where his experience provides no particular benefit." Sergeant Walsh added, "In fact, his combat training may need to be modified for Royal Guard service. SAS techniques are designed for different objectives than what we require." As the formal briefing concluded, Richardson made one final announcement. "Recruit Williams has agreed to assist with training when appropriate, sharing his expertise to benefit the entire class. However, he remains a recruit like all of you, subject to the same standards and requirements for graduation." When the assembly was dismissed, Marcus found himself surrounded by fellow recruits with a mixture of reactions. Some approached with genuine respect and curiosity, wanting to learn from his experience. Others maintained a polite distance, clearly unsure how to interact with someone whose background was so different from their own. David Chen was among the first to approach. "That explains why you're such a good teacher," he said with a smile. "Thanks for helping me with the combat training." "You did the work," Marcus replied. "I just offered some guidance." Thomas Burke, the former police officer, had practical questions. "How do we handle this in training? I mean, do we still compete with you in exercises?" "Absolutely," Marcus said firmly. "I'm here to learn Royal Guard procedures just like everyone else. My previous experience doesn't make me automatically qualified for this role." Not all reactions were positive. Marcus noticed a small group of recruits talking quietly in the corner, occasionally glancing in his direction. He recognized the dynamic. Some would see his presence as inspiring. Others would feel intimidated or resentful. Over the following days, the revelation of Marcus's background created a noticeable shift in the group dynamics. During physical training, some recruits pushed themselves harder, inspired to meet the standards set by a former elite soldier. Others became more cautious, afraid of embarrassing themselves in front of someone with his experience. In academic sessions covering Royal Guard history and protocol, Marcus was careful to participate as just another student. He asked questions, took notes, and demonstrated that his Special Forces background hadn't prepared him for the ceremonial and diplomatic aspects of Royal Guard service. The marksmanship training sessions became more collaborative as Captain Davies encouraged Marcus to assist other recruits with their technique. Marcus found that teaching helped him feel more integrated into the group rather than standing apart from it. James Mitchell proved to be one of the most changed by the revelation. Rather than being intimidated, he seemed energized by the opportunity to learn from someone with Marcus's background. His performance improved dramatically as his ego gave way to genuine desire for excellence. During one evening study session, James approached Marcus privately. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "Not just for not holding my behavior against me, but for showing me what real confidence looks like. I was so busy trying to prove I was the best that I forgot to actually focus on getting better." "Leadership isn't about being the strongest or the fastest," Marcus replied. "It's about bringing out the best in everyone around you." As the weeks passed, Marcus found that revealing his background had actually helped him achieve what he had originally sought: integration into the group. Rather than being the mysterious older recruit, he became a resource and mentor for his fellow trainees. But challenges remained ahead, and Marcus knew that his true test would come not in training exercises, but in proving he could adapt his warrior skills to the very different demands of Royal Guard service. The final week of training brought the ultimate test: a live exercise involving real royal family members during an actual public event. The recruits would be assessed on their ability to blend ceremonial duties with genuine security awareness, all while maintaining the dignity and tradition expected of the Royal Guard. Marcus stood in formation with his fellow recruits outside Buckingham Palace, their red uniforms immaculate and their weapons polished to mirror brightness. After 12 weeks of intense training, only 31 of the original 43 recruits remained. Those who had made it this far represented the best of their class. The event was a garden party hosted by Princess Charlotte for a children's charity. Over 200 guests would attend, including diplomats, charity officials, and carefully selected members of the public. The security challenges were real, but so was the need to maintain the warm, welcoming atmosphere that such events required. Sergeant Major Richardson had divided the recruits into teams, each responsible for different aspects of security. Marcus found himself paired with James Mitchell, their partnership representing one of the training program's most dramatic transformations. The former rivals had become genuine teammates, each bringing different strengths to their collaboration. "Remember," Captain Davies briefed them one final time, "you are guardians, not soldiers. Your presence should be reassuring, not intimidating. The public should feel safe and welcome, not watched and threatened." Marcus understood the distinction better than most. In the SAS, success often meant remaining invisible until violence was necessary. As a Royal Guard, success meant being visible, approachable, and completely in control without ever appearing threatening. As the first guests began arriving, Marcus took his assigned position near the main entrance to the garden. His role was to observe and assess while maintaining the ceremonial bearing expected of a royal guard. James was positioned at the opposite end of the garden, their communication limited to discreet hand signals and predetermined movements. The early part of the event proceeded smoothly. Guests mingled politely, children from the charity laughed and played games organized by palace staff, and Princess Charlotte moved gracefully through the crowd. Speaking with supporters and posing for photographs, Marcus scanned the crowd with practiced eyes, noting exits, identifying potential security risks, and maintaining awareness of Princess Charlotte's position at all times. His training had taught him to recognize danger signs, nervous behavior, inappropriate clothing for the weather, unusual interest in security arrangements. It was during the presentation ceremony that Marcus noticed him. A man in his 50s, well-dressed but sweating despite the mild weather, positioned himself near the platform where Princess Charlotte was speaking. His behavior was subtle but wrong, too much attention to the guard's positions, hands that kept moving to his jacket pocket, and eyes that darted around rather than focusing on the ceremony. Marcus caught James's attention with a subtle hand signal, then indicated the suspicious individual with an almost imperceptible nod. James acknowledged and began moving through the crowd to get a better angle on the man. The training had emphasized the importance of not overreacting to potential threats. Royal events attracted all types of people, including those who were simply nervous about meeting royalty or excited about the occasion. False alarms could be as damaging to the royal guard's reputation as missed threats, but Marcus's instincts, honed through years of life-or-death situations, were screaming warnings. The man's behavior pattern matched profiles he had learned to recognize, someone preparing to act. As Princess Charlotte concluded her remarks and began moving toward the man's section of the crowd, Marcus made a decision. He activated his concealed communication device with a predetermined code that would alert all security personnel without causing public alarm. Control, this is Williams, requesting silent backup at position 7. Possible code yellow. Code yellow indicated a potential threat that required immediate attention without visible response. Within seconds, Marcus saw other guards beginning to shift positions, creating a subtle barrier between the suspicious individual and Princess Charlotte. The man noticed the movement and his behavior changed. His nervousness increased and his hand moved definitively toward his jacket pocket. Marcus began moving through the crowd, his ceremonial pace masking the urgency of his approach. As Princess Charlotte approached within 10 feet of the man, he suddenly reached into his jacket and pulled out a large envelope. "Your Highness," he called out loudly, causing heads to turn and security personnel to tense. Marcus was now close enough to intervene if necessary, but the situation remained ambiguous. The man could be an overeager petitioner with a letter or something far more dangerous. In the SS, such ambiguity would be resolved with overwhelming force. As a royal guard, Marcus had to make a more nuanced decision. "Your Highness, please," the man continued, stepping forward with the envelope extended. "I must speak with you about my daughter's charity work." Marcus positioned himself within arm's reach of the man, ready to act but not yet intervening. Princess Charlotte, showing the poise that came from years of public appearances, smiled graciously while her personal protection officers moved closer. "I'd be delighted to hear about your daughter's work," Princess Charlotte replied warmly. "Perhaps you could give your information to one of my staff members and we can arrange a proper meeting." The man's face fell with disappointment, but he accepted the envelope back and nodded respectfully. "Of course, Your Highness. Thank you for your kindness." As the moment passed peacefully, Marcus felt the familiar mixture of relief and residual adrenaline that followed any potential security incident. His assessment had been correct. The man was nervous and overeager, but not dangerous. More importantly, the situation had been handled with exactly the right balance of caution and diplomacy. Sergeant Major Richardson appeared beside Marcus as the crowd began to disperse. "Good eye, Williams. Your alert allowed us to monitor the situation without disrupting the event." "Thank you, Sergeant Major. Just doing my job." "Actually," Richardson said with a slight smile, "you were doing exactly what a royal guard should do. You recognized a potential threat, communicated appropriately, positioned yourself to respond if necessary, but allowed diplomacy to resolve the situation first." James Mitchell joined them, having maintained his position throughout the incident. "That was perfectly handled," he said to Marcus. In the police, we would have moved much more aggressively. Different mission requires different methods, Marcus replied. Here, protecting the royal family includes protecting their ability to interact naturally with the public. As the garden party concluded and the recruits began their post-event debriefing, Marcus reflected on how much his perspective had changed during training. The skills that had made him an effective special forces operator were still valuable, but they had to be applied with restraint, wisdom, and an understanding of the larger mission. Captain Davies gathered the recruits for their final assessment. Ladies and gentlemen, you have successfully completed Royal Guard training. Tomorrow you will take your oaths and begin your service to the Crown. Looking around at his fellow recruits, now fellow guards, Marcus felt a sense of accomplishment different from anything he had experienced in the SAS. This was not about defeating enemies or completing missions in secret. This was about serving something larger than himself in full view of the public, representing the best traditions of British service. The quiet older recruit who had been laughed at during training had become exactly what he had hoped to, become a guardian worthy of the uniform and the trust it represented. 6 months later, Marcus stood at his post outside St. James's Palace, the early morning light reflecting off his immaculate uniform. The red tunic, black trousers, and iconic bearskin hat had become as familiar to him as his old combat gear had once been. But more than the uniform had changed. Marcus had found the sense of purpose and peace that had eluded him during his final months in the SAS. The transformation hadn't been immediate or easy. Learning to balance the ceremonial aspects of Royal Guard duty with genuine security responsibilities had required him to develop new instincts. Where his Special Forces training had emphasized decisive action and overwhelming response, Royal Guard service demanded patience, discretion, and the ability to protect while remaining almost invisible. A group of tourists approached, cameras ready, excited to photograph one of the famous guards. Marcus maintained his stoic expression while internally smiling at their enthusiasm. These interactions, which had initially felt awkward to someone accustomed to operating in shadows, had become one of his favorite aspects of the job. "Excuse me," a young girl asked her mother loudly. "Why doesn't the guard move?" Marcus remained perfectly still, but he was acutely aware of his surroundings. This was another skill he had developed, the ability to appear completely motionless while maintaining full situational awareness. In the distance, he could see James Mitchell at his own post, performing the same duty with the same dedication. The friendship that had developed between Marcus and James had become one of the unexpected benefits of his career change. The younger man had proven to be an excellent guard, combining natural leadership abilities with the humility he had learned during training. They often worked the same shifts, their complementary skills making them an effective team. As his 2-hour posting period neared its end, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The SAS had taught him to be a warrior, but the Royal Guard had taught him to be a protector. The distinction was subtle but profound. His communication earpiece crackled with a quiet update from the control room. "All stations, routine rotation in 10 minutes. No incidents to report." Marcus allowed himself a small sense of satisfaction. 6 months of active duty had passed without any serious security incidents on his watch. More importantly, he had successfully adapted his skills to serve in a role that required strength, tempered by restraint, vigilance balanced with approachability. The changing of the guard ceremony began, with the incoming relief marching across the courtyard in perfect formation. Marcus prepared for the formal transfer of responsibility, a ritual that connected him to centuries of guards who had stood at these same posts. As the ceremony concluded and Marcus was officially relieved, he made his way to the guard room for debriefing. Sergeant Major Richardson was waiting with the day's reports and assignments for the following week. "Williams," Richardson said as Marcus entered, "I have some news that might interest you." "Yes, Sergeant Major." "The palace has requested you for a special assignment." Princess Charlotte specifically asked for guards who had demonstrated exceptional situational awareness during public events. Marcus felt a surge of pride at the recognition. The garden party incident 6 months earlier had become something of a legend in Royal Guard circles and an example of how to handle potential threats with exactly the right balance of caution and diplomacy. "The assignment is a 3-week tour of Commonwealth countries," Richardson continued. "Official state visits, public appearances, and some challenging security environments. They want experienced guards who can adapt to different situations. I'd be honored to serve, Sergeant Major. Richardson smiled. I thought you might be. James Mitchell will also be part of the detail. The two of you have developed quite a reputation as an effective team. As if summoned by the mention of his name, James appeared in the doorway, having completed his own posting. His face lit up when he heard about the assignment. A Commonwealth tour? James asked excitedly. That's the kind of assignment most guards wait years to get. Your training performance and operational record have earned it, Richardson replied. Both of you have shown that excellence comes from continuous improvement, not just natural talent. Later that evening, Marcus sat in his small apartment near the barracks, reflecting on the unexpected direction his life had taken. The walls were decorated with photos from his Royal Guard service rather than military commendations from his SAS years. The change represented more than just a career shift. It was a fundamental transformation in how he saw himself and his role in the world. His phone buzzed with a message from David Chen, who had become one of the standout performers among their training class. Saw the news about your Commonwealth assignment. Well-deserved, mate. Drinks to celebrate when you get back? Marcus smiled as he typed his response. The camaraderie he had found among the Royal Guards was different from the Brotherhood of Special Forces, but it was just as real and meaningful. These men weren't just colleagues. They were friends who shared a common dedication to service and excellence. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. He opened it to find James standing in the hallway, holding 2 cups of coffee. Thought you might want to talk through the Commonwealth assignment, James said, offering one of the cups. As they sat in Marcus's small living room, discussing the challenges and opportunities of their upcoming assignment, Marcus realized how much both of them had grown since those first contentious days of training. You know, James said thoughtfully, I never properly thanked you for how you handled my attitude during training. You could have made me look like a complete fool, but you chose to help me become better instead. Leadership isn't about proving you're the best, Marcus replied, echoing advice he had given months earlier. It's about bringing out the best in others. I've been thinking about applying for officer training, James continued. My assessment scores are strong, and I think I'm ready for more responsibility. Marcus nodded approvingly. You'd make an excellent officer. You have the right combination of confidence and humility. As James prepared to leave, he paused at the door. The funny thing is, when we started training, I thought success meant being better than everyone else. Now I realize it means being part of something bigger than yourself. After James left, Marcus stood at his window looking out at the palace grounds. In the distance, he could see the guards at their posts, maintaining the same vigilant watch that had protected the crown for centuries. Tomorrow, he would join them again, proud to be part of that tradition. They Xiao, former SAS sharpshooter who had been laughed at during training, had found something he hadn't even known he was looking for, a way to serve that honored both his skills and his values. In learning to be a Royal Guard, Marcus Williams had discovered that true strength came not from the ability to wage war, but from the wisdom to preserve peace. The red uniform he would wear tomorrow represented more than just ceremonial tradition. It represented a commitment to protect not through force but through presence, not through intimidation but through honor. For a man who had spent years in the shadows, standing proudly in the light felt like coming home.